So I'm sure you saw this story over the last few days. It's this incredible story. It sort of gripped the nation. A homeless man discovered on the streets of Columbus, Ohio, a man who's down on his luck. He's been asking passersby for any help they can offer. And he has an amazing, hard to believe, the voice is coming out of the face, talent. He has an amazing, amazing radio voice. Presumably, you have seen this in the last few days.
There are often homeless people asking for change at freeway exit ramps, but recently there's been this guy with an interesting sign at I-71 and Hudson Street. His handwritten sign says he has the God-given gift of a great voice.
Hey, I'm going to make you work for your dollar. Say something with that great radio voice.
When you're listening to nothing but the best of oldies, you're listening to Magic 98.9. Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you.
No matter how many times I see it, I still can't believe it. Just incredible, right? That was posted online by the Columbus Dispatch newspaper earlier this week. Since it was, the man in that video, Ted Williams, has become a national sensation. He has gotten countless job offers from places like NFL Films and the Cleveland Cavaliers NBA team. And tonight, I'm very proud to be able to say that Ted Williams has been hired by MSNBC. He will record voiceovers for our new Lean Forward ad campaign, which is really cool. Even more cool is the fact that Mr. Williams is going to be interviewed tonight on MSNBC on the show that is right after this one, The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, and that is quite awesome. More awesome, though, is that we have been able to engage Mr. Williams today as hired talent here at MSNBC to help Congress, to help the Republicans in Congress with the parts of the United States Constitution they did not want read out loud today, even as the rest of the Constitution was. Ready? Now, from the golden age of radio, ladies and gentlemen, the 18th Amendment, part of the Constitution the new Republican majority ordered not to be read on the House floor today. Take it away, Ted Williams.
After 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within the importation thereof into or the exportation thereof from the United States and all territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited.
Is hereby prohibited. Thank you, Mr. Williams. The 18th Amendment to the Constitution banned booze. It was an incredibly stupid thing that our country did. But it was, in fact, part of the Constitution at one point. Lots of other dumb and even evil stuff has been part of the Constitution from time to time, like, for example, the Three-Fifths Compromise, which declared that representation and taxes should be apportioned among the states by a means of counting that excluded Indians altogether and counted all other persons, by which they meant black people, as 3/5 of a person. Also, there was part of Article 4 of the Constitution that required escaped slaves to be returned to their owners no matter where in the country they had escaped to. The Constitution, admittedly awesome, has some totally not awesome, indefensible stuff in it from time to time. And you can handle that truth in one of two ways. You could acknowledge that the Constitution has had some really crazy stuff in it from time to time, use that as a teaching moment to remember that the Constitution is not the Ten Commandments. The Constitution is a living document that has changed over time in ways both good and bad as the country has gotten older. Or you can be a constitutional fundamentalist, and you can ignore the fact that there has been bad stuff in it over time. And when you stage something that you're calling a reading of the entire Constitution, you just leave out the parts that you find embarrassing to pronounce out loud. It should also be noted that another part of Article 4 was left out of the reading of the Constitution in Congress today. It was Article 4, Section 4. Quote, "The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion and on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence." That section was left out of the reading today as well. Now, I don't think that is because anybody was embarrassed about that section. I don't think it was because that section offended some fundamentalist view of the Constitution as perfect and unchanging. As far as we know, that part of the Constitution was left out of the reading today, at least initially, because, and I quote, "The Constitution was placed in a 3-ring binder and the pages simply stuck together." So the member of Congress who was reading Article 4 accidentally skipped a bit. See? God's trying to tell us something about human fallibility. Republicans have been in power in the House for roughly 33 hours now, and their initial pledges to the American people have turned out to be kind of a mess. There was today's attempt to read the Constitution in its entirety, which turned into reading whatever pages didn't get stuck together or didn't feel awkward to say out loud. Also, of course, during the campaign, Republicans pledged to cut $100 billion worth of government spending in the first year. That promise has now been cast aside as hypothetical. Republicans have now pledged that they won't even aim higher than $50 billion worth of cuts. Forget that old 100, they didn't mean it. Also in their pledge to America was a Republican promise to allow Democrats to offer amendments to legislation. On their first bill out of the gate, now that they're in charge, Republicans are not going to allow any amendments. After Republicans won control of the House, they made this pledge, apparently from scripted talking points. Watch.
Open rules will make a triumphant return to the House floor.
I think open rules will make a triumphant return to the House floor.
A return to open rules in the House. Not only a return, a triumphant return. Fast forward to today, quote, none of the bills that will be brought to the floor this week will be brought under open rules. That's not very triumphant. This week, Republicans adopted a new House rule called cut as you go. They ruled that any bill that would add to the deficit has to be matched by spending cuts of the same amount. As you probably know, one of the first bills out of the gate for Republicans is a repeal of health reform, a bill that, according to the nonpartisan CBO, that would add $230 billion to the deficit. Repealing health reform would add $230 billion to the deficit. With this new cut-as-you-go rule, what are the Republicans going to cut to make up for that? Nothing. They issued themselves a loophole, so the very first bill they will introduce to repeal health reform doesn't have to follow their loudly proclaimed new rule. Even on the easy stuff, Republicans are having a really difficult time out of the gate. As one of their first pledges of transparency, Republicans promised to make publicly available, quote, a list of the names of each member in attendance at a committee hearing or meeting. So you get to know who's in attendance at a committee hearing and who is not in attendance. Seems relatively reasonable. But then Tuesday night, behind closed doors, Republicans did away with that provision. They're not going to do that after all. But wait, there's more. In their pledge to America, Republicans also promised to, quote, require each bill moving through Congress to include a clause citing the specific constitutional authority upon which the bill is justified. If you want to offer a bill, you have to cite where the Constitution allows you to do what's in that bill. As of today, quote, none of the three bills that Republicans plan to introduce this week had the constitutional citation. The Republican Party has wrapped itself in the Constitution at every turn for political purposes. They have outdone themselves on this matter. It was revealed today that during yesterday's big swearing-in of the new 112th Congress, two House Republicans were not present inside the chamber, Congressman Pete Sessions of Texas and Congressman Mike Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. Where were they when everybody else was getting sworn in? They were attending a Mike Fitzpatrick swearing-in party somewhere else in the Capitol. If you're not officially sworn in, you are not an actual member of Congress. So says the Constitution. Despite the fact that they were not technically congressmen because they skipped the swearing-in in favor of going to a party that was about the swearing-in, Mr. Sessions and Mr. Fitzpatrick went on to cast votes in the House. Mr. Sessions even presided over a Rules Committee hearing when he wasn't technically a member of Congress. Why did they think this was okay? Reportedly, and I'm quoting here, the pair watched the swearing-in on television from the Capitol Visitor Center with their hands raised. Raise your hand at the TV. Dude, you can't get sworn in by a TV. You have to be there in person. If you could become a congressman by raising your hand at the TV, everyone who was simultaneously watching C-SPAN yesterday and reaching for something on a high shelf or waving to a friend would be a congressman right now. The two not yet really congressmen who faked their swearing in had to be properly sworn in after the fact today. So the first 33 hours in power is not going very well for Republicans. And for the record, and this is important, none of these missteps are things that Democrats have done to Republicans. These are all self-inflicted things. Republicans carefully laid out all of these rakes on the floor right inside the front door, and they've just been stepping on them one after the other since they got in. House Republicans still have a really ambitious agenda, including wanting to repeal health reform and Wall Street reform and all these other things they've pledged to do. Since Democrats probably can't count on continued Republican rake-stepping at least this much in any one day for too much longer, what's the Democratic strategy heading out? Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Peter Welch of Vermont, who's a former member of the House Rules Committee. Congressman Welch, thanks very much for your time. It's nice to have you here.
It's good to be here, and I was in front of the Rules Committee with Congressman Sessions, and I thought he was a legitimate chairman.
The things that Congressman Fitzpatrick and Congressman Sessions, the things that they voted on when they weren't technically members of Congress, do they have to go back and vote on them again? Do they get undone? The things that they introduced, do they have to be sort of made right somehow?
Well, you know, the parliamentarian in the Rules Committee is tying itself in knots trying to figure that out. And some of these things are somewhat silly but correctable, but some are quite serious. You know, the Republicans campaigned very effectively and beat us up badly and won a big majority. But whether they can govern effectively and responsibly, we're getting off to a bad start, and it's hard to have an awful lot of confidence. And some of the promises they made after criticizing us, like having open rules so that we could propose amendments, like having a commitment to paying down the deficit, and then having as their first item of business, literally the first item of business, repealing health care that will increase the deficit by $230 billion. That's got me alarmed, and I think it should have a lot of the American people concerned.
Are there any of the procedural changes that they have proposed? I'm thinking specifically of like this proposal that they withdrew, actually, that they would want to publish committee members' attendance at various committee hearings and committee proceedings. Are there specific things they've proposed that you actually think might make a difference and might make the House run more smoothly? Or do you think that these are, in the whole, essentially symbolic measures that won't make a difference?
They made a proposal to have open rules, and that actually is fundamentally important and a real opportunity. They criticized us for not having more open rules, and actually I think they had some legitimate criticisms of us. But on the health care bill, which is going to involve taking away hard-fought insurance protections for middle-class families in this country and for seniors, they are not even going to let myself and 65 colleagues who proposed amendments to let you know, because we can take an up or down vote on whether we let insurance companies continue to deny us because we have a pre-existing condition, or whether we're going to protect the right of parents to have their kids on their policies until age 26, or whether we're going to maintain the law that we have now that you can continue to get coverage with no lifetime caps if you have a chronic disease like diabetes or cancer. We should have an opportunity to vote yes or no. And when I was in the Rules Committee, I really suggested to the Republicans, they have people in their district whose kids need that health care coverage, who folks, brothers and sisters who have pre-existing conditions. Why not each of us raise our hand, vote yes or no, and then we are not only accountable, but our constituents know where we stand, and then they can decide whether they agree with us or not in the next election. So that's a very important reform applied to a very important bill. Their bill on health care is taking away rights that Americans now have, and we should be held accountable, and people should know where we stand on each of those provisions.
If the Republicans stick to their plan right now on that health care reform bill, which is to allow no amendments, even though they have been saying they want there to be an open rule, they want there to be amendments, broadly speaking, even if they don't want them for this one piece of legislation, if they proceed the way they say they're going to, will Democrats have a chance in this process to try to resell the idea of health reform to the American public? Is this a chance to do more public communication around the benefits of health reform?
It is, and we must. You know, the Democrats blew it in explaining to the American people what was in the health care reform and why it was so important. And the Republicans were very successful vilifying Obamacare. It meant a million different bad things to a million different people. But now that we're trying to get specific, and we're saying and asking the question, do you think your kids should stay on your policy when they get out of high school and they get an entry-level job with no health care? Do you think that seniors, your mom and dad, who are on Medicare and are trying to take care of themselves, should they have free preventive care? Do you think that somebody who's got a pre-existing condition shouldn't be able to buy insurance? Well, Americans support that, and the Republicans know it. A reason they're not having hearings is if they had a hearing, they'd lose. So, you know, the campaign is one thing. But when you get to governing, you actually have to acknowledge that the decisions you make have real-world consequences for real people, real families all across this country. And we've got to take on that fight to make the American people know what's at stake and what's being taken away from them needlessly. And incidentally, the control goes back to the insurance companies.
Democratic Congressman Peter Welch of Vermont, seen his national profile rise recently with his strong criticisms of the Republicans and at times of his own party. Congressman Welch, thank you for speaking out. Thanks for your time tonight, sir.
Thank you.